ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the WISE Public Lecture Series. It's my pleasure to welcome you here today. WISE is a multidisciplinary institute on campus. It has over 95 members spanning all faculties here. And our vision is clean energy, accessible and affordable for all. And we work primarily in three ways: collaboration, where we unite leading researchers from dozens of disciplines. We work in the area of partnerships, partnering with local and global companies, as well as NGOs and startups. And finally, in the area we call influence, we look to translate important scientific discoveries for a wide audience to inform policy. I believe that would be highly relevant to today's lecture. So today we have the great privilege of having Dr. Ron Dembo here to present on behavior change and untapped resource in coping with climate change. And Dr. Ron Dembo is the founder and CEO of Zero Footprint, a clean tech software and services company that makes environmental impact measurable, visible, and manageable for businesses, governments, institutions, and individuals. Zero Footprint solutions mitigate environmental risk and drive cost reductions through behavioral change. Dr. Dembo is also the founder and former CEO of Algorithmics Corporation, growing it from a startup to the world's largest enterprise risk management software company with over 70% of the world's top 100 banks as clients and consistent recognition of one of Canada's 50th best managed companies. In May 2007, Dr. Dembo was made a Lifetime Fields Institute Fellow. And this fellow awards individuals who have made outstanding contributions in the Fields Institute, its programs, and to the Canadian mathematical community. Currently, he sits on a number of boards and is a member of the Climate Change Adaptation Advisory Committee and the UN Habitat World Urban Campaign Steering Committee. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Ron Dembo.
Thank you. I'm not sure if I need this mic. Do you want to try it without the mic? See if you can hear me. Can you hear me? No? Okay. That solves that one. So I'm wired up. About 40 years ago, almost exactly 40 years ago, I showed up on this campus to do a PhD. And it looked a little different, quite a little different, quite different. I've been back once or twice since, and every time I come back, it morphs into something else. But I remember I showed up from Paris. I'd been living in Paris, France, for 6 months of just learning how to speak French and drink wine. And it was an enormous culture shock to arrive in Waterloo at the time. I remember I learned how to cook very quickly because there weren't any places to eat. I'm sure there are a lot more now. And one of my most outstanding moments, which I've never ever duplicated since, was I had a neighbor in one of the student houses here. And he was from Mexico, from a very wealthy family. He went home to his sister's wedding and, comes back and we sit down at this Formica table in a really crummy little apartment, as I remember it. It's sort of leaked. And he brings out this bottle, and it's a bottle of Napoleon brandy, 1864 or something like that. And it was spectacular. I've never, ever had anything like that again. I'm sure I probably would even struggle to afford that today. That's amazing. So I was asked to give this lecture, and I'm really grateful to the people who invited me. But for me, it's one thing. I really have reached a stage where life is too short and I really want to do stuff. So I'm going to challenge you to do stuff. And my measure of success is whether you do the stuff. And, it's really, there's things we can do that are so easy, and I want to show you more or less what they are. So, let me start with a little story. Once upon a time, there was a telephone. Probably most of you would not recognize this phone. But that was an advanced telephone. I remember earlier versions. And when you had that telephone, you basically had no choice. You got a phone, that's what it looked like, and you had a schedule of how you'd pay. And it turns out that one of the biggest beefs that Canadians had at that time, and it's probably even after I joined as a student, was the cost of that phone. There was constant complaining about the cost of phones. So fast forward to, a great Waterloo success story and another great story from Silicon Valley. And I have both of these phones now, and I'm sure I spend at least 10 to maybe 100 times as much at times on phones than I used to. And I'm not the only one. And there's very little crying about phones. In fact, you don't hear this in Parliament. What you do hear is about the carriers and the plans that we have. But there's one huge difference. Today, we own our phone. And then we didn't own our phone. So the fact that it costs more and does more, and we choose whether to have roaming charges or not, doesn't matter. I mean, we own it. So if we get a $1,000 roaming bill, that's our problem. Once upon a time, people smoked at work. I don't know if any of you remember this one, but I remember going, when I started algorithmics, to Société Générale in Paris, sitting down at a desk in a big trading floor, and everyone on that trading floor was smoking. And there were no open windows, and the air was thick with smoke. I then went on to Repsol Petroleum, was one of the largest companies in Spain, using an algorithm that I'd actually partially developed here to run the River Tajo, which is a hydroelectric system. And when I negotiated with them, we sat down in a small room. It was tiny, and not much bigger than here. 8 people around the desk, really packed in, all chain smoking, no windows, 8 hours. And I kind of nearly died. I probably did. So what's changed, The big change was that non-smokers found out that they were at risk. And they took ownership of the air in their rooms. And the big change was non-smokers made smoking go away. And it has gone away. You go to Paris today, you're not allowed to smoke anywhere. And that's kind of unbelievable in a way. Whenever I go there, I do a double take. I mean, where's all the smokers? I remember sitting on an airplane, and the way that it was arranged was on the right-hand side was smoking, on the left-hand side was no smoking. Go figure, So that story has changed. So once upon a time, we threw everything out. Not so long ago. And in fact, if you go to New York City, they throw everything out today. They're starting to deal with this. But today we own our trash. It's quite an amazing story. I mean, we do the most gruesome things with trash. We take this organic material and put it in a green bin, and it smells like crazy. But we do it. And you would never have believed that we'd do this if you would put yourself back in time. So the key here is we own it. It's our problem. So I once had the great fortune to meet Jane Goodall, and we spent an evening together in Toronto. She's an amazing lady, actually, but I had a fantastic time. It was just when I started Zero Footprint. She looks at me, she says, "What do you do?" I said, "Well, I run this thing called Zero Footprint." And she says, "Zero Footprint? There's no such thing as a zero footprint." So she tells me the story about chimps and baboons. This is a very nice story. I mean, these all have a message behind them. So chimps are these great, cute little creatures that when they're hungry go up to a fig tree, and they go up to a fig and they squeeze it gently, and if it's not ripe, they move on to the next fig and squeeze it gently. And then they find it eventually and eat it. Baboons, on the other hand, go up to a fig tree, and this is real, grab a fig. If it's not ripe, they throw it away. And they grab another fig, and if it's not ripe, they throw it away until they find a fig that's ripe. And I think we are baboons, basically. We must have descended from baboons, not chimps. Because we really invented waste. If you think of it, human beings, our species, invented waste like that never existed before. in the animal world, there is no waste, really. You know, stuff regenerates, and in the marine world, it's the same. But we've invented waste that doesn't go away. So how do we change this story? And that's the theme of this talk. And the challenge is for you to change Waterloo's story. Okay. So I'm going to tell you how, after many, many years, we started in 2005, what we've finally come down to, which I think is starting to make a lot of sense. So first of all, it starts with the whole issue of engagement. We believe that if I look at, when I walk down the Waterloo campus and I look at buildings, you know what I see? I see a pot of gold under each building. The pot of gold is essentially the waste in that building. And if we were to mine that waste, we have an amazing resource. If I go to Toronto community housing, 2,000 buildings, I see very big pots of gold under those buildings, and I see very depressed communities. And imagine if those communities could actually mine that resource. What we do is focused on individuals, and that's the challenge, that's the real complexity, to change their behavior. So for us, you are our target, every one of you. Our customers, in making this happen, is leverage. We would go to a University of Waterloo and try and do something, or a City of Waterloo, or a government. But why now? Why have we sort of come to this now? So there's a couple of amazing things happening in this world. The amount of data happening around us is just almost hard to comprehend. The growth in data. You know, there are these statistics that in the last year, data's grown more than it has in almost since time immemorial. And then there's things out there that measure. So, for example, it's not hard today to find something that'll measure real-time energy in this room, or to measure whether you've actually measured your glucose level in your bloodstream and publish it to the internet, or a Nike band that'll tell you how many steps you've done. So there's tons and tons of these sensors proliferating, which are generating huge amounts of data, which finally create a situation that makes it possible for us to measure and create evidence-based change. Evidence-based is the key word. So the people we target are that person, me, who's what we call the measured self. These are people who have a life. I mean, they have banks and financial issues. They may be sick or may be very healthy and attend health clubs. They go to work. They have a home with all of its complexities. They travel. And if you want to engage or change the behavior of this person, you won't have much success, in my opinion, if you engage them on a particular thin slice. So if I come to this person and I say, you know what, I'm going to engage you just on how many steps you walk a day, or just on your energy, or whatever. That's easy, to get tired of. But if we engage people like this around their entire life in a way that's meaningful to their life, we can change their behavior. So these people, these measured selves, have a set of brands they interact with. They're an ecology. Each person in this room is a different ecology. So I shop at Loblaws, you shop at Whole Foods, I use Hydro One as my supplier, use Waterloo Hydro, my bank's RBC, yours is BMO, and so on. So we each have different brands we're associated with, and if I went through this room and I looked at the union of brands, it would be quite big. Now each of these brands is pumping out data. Each of these devices is pumping out data. So for example, Metrolinx in Toronto has opened up its data. And with your permission, I can tell whether you've actually ridden on the subway that day, and exactly where you rode and how much you spent. Toronto has some open data sets today. Hydro One is being forced to open its data so that we can actually write applications to an API and take out our electricity data. And Loblaws collects data to a degree that they can tell exactly when you bought what packet of diapers, and they send you to buy more diapers. They send you targeted information, targeted marketing. If you go and buy a pair of Gap jeans, they know it's you who's buying this Gap jeans. They know exactly what you like. And they know your demographic, and they take that information and create useful information with it. Same with Google and same with Facebook, etc. So one of the things that's really paradoxical about engagement is if I want to engage you, I need as much software as I would to engage Citibank. When we were running algorithmics and we were trying to measure the risk of a bank, we went and had to link to every single system that produced data on the portfolios that that bank held. That's a lot of data. And it's a lot of different systems that come in lots of different ways. In the same way, we need to be able to integrate to all of these things. They spew out data in different frequencies at different, So it starts with a big data problem. How do we collect data from all of these brands that you interact with? And how do we do it on scale so that we can interact with millions of people and get the data on their lives? Obviously, under privacy conditions and with their permission. And then there's two other major areas. When you have data, it's pretty useless per se. If I give you a time series of your energy usage in your home, it's not very useful. But if I give you a very simple to read gauge that says you are in the top third of all of your peers, that's very easy. So you have to have analytics that take that data and make it useful. And then you need to be able to present things in a way that makes sense. But finally, we are a species that live on rewards. And there isn't a single person in this room who's not motivated by rewards, me included. We motivate differently. What social science tells us is that what motivates me might not motivate you. But we're both motivated by some form of reward or recognition as a reward. So that's the first thing we know. The second thing we know from behavioral economics is we're not rational. So you put those two things together, you can come up with reward schemes that get people to do things. So we have just released, it hasn't been officially released, it's a soft release, a rewards platform that's based on evidence and promotes socially beneficial behavior. So here's a simple idea. Imagine if there was a point system, think of air miles or any, where when you issued a point, something good happened in the world. Think it got more sustainable. Okay? I'll give you some examples of that. So one example might be you followed the routine that you were given in the hospital when they released you from your last heart attack. Or you walked 30 minutes yesterday. It turns out that if everyone in Canada walked 30 minutes every day, we would have a much lower health bill. So we think of a broad social good. When you do this thing that gives you a point, something better happened in the world. So for example, it might be, I saved a bit of energy in this room measurably. And when that reward is redeemed, the world doesn't get any worse. So on an evidence-based way, auditable, a point results in a net, more sustainable world. So you could think of this as a metric for sustainability, a single metric that unites that whole circle. So this is really a very simple idea, and this is what we've based it on. So once again, the bottom line is a point equals a better world. So we've actually been approached by a number of different people. And when I think of sustainability, I think health is a very big part of sustainability. And it turns out that health is a huge problem. Health is related to energy and so on. But health is an order of magnitude more expensive and beneficial when it comes to behavioral change than energy. To give you an example, the US health bill is the 4th largest country in the world. It's bigger than the 4th largest country. It's about 4 trillion. So you make a 1% change in the US health bill, that's a lot. But it turns out that the entire cost of energy in the US, end to end, is 300 billion. So you can see what a huge difference that is. We're hitting so one of the things that's provoking this talk is we've hit a brick wall. We've hit a brick wall in health, we've hit a brick wall in energy. By that I mean that we are so used to building energy when we need it, building hospitals when we have more sick people, building infrastructure when we need it, rather than avoiding that. And this behavior change is about avoiding. So walking 30 minutes a day turns out to be an incredibly interesting and incredibly simple idea. And there are 2 very large initiatives that are about to happen around walking in Canada. At some points we're paying almost 50 cents on the dollar in Ontario on health, and we cannot sustain that. So this is one way to change that. I mean, an obvious one is reducing energy. We've done quite well at times with reducing energy in very large corporations, but getting to individuals to reduce energy in their home has not really yet taken off. Using less paper, you just have to go to Bermuda to look at the one place in Bermuda where they burn all waste. And Bermuda looks a lot like Canada in many ways in terms of the waste. 1/3 of all that waste is paper. I bet you that's true here. So using less paper, but we can measure all of these things today. Today when I walk around the Royal Bank with my card and I go and Xerox, they know I have Xeroxed 300 pages in color, single-spaced or whatever, single-sided. So we're measuring this. We're talking, for example, to a large bank, Deutsche Bank, and they know exactly how much paper every single person uses in that firm across the entire world, which is quite amazing. When you redeem such a point, the problem with a lot of programs today, either try to change your behavior supposedly, and I'll give you one. Air Miles today will give you points if you promise to save energy. They'll give you a certain number of points. And then you can take those points and buy bunker fuel and put it in your backyard and light it and make the world a lot worse. So we have a lot of greenwashing out there, and that's a good example of it. And what we have now is the ability to actually create evidence-based behavior change, which really is hard to, it's hard to argue with, because you can actually audit what's the good that's done. Let me give you a case study. There's a couple of them I want to go through. So let's take something that's absolutely ubiquitous. This is called the Run for the Cure. So you see this, almost every bank has one of these. There's the Run for the Kids, Run for MS, Cycle for MS, Swim for the dolphins. There's tons of stuff. They're all the same. It's actually a pyramid scheme. I get you to compete. You get your friends to donate money. And in that way, I have this huge network effect in raising money. So these things occur. The most recent one was last weekend, I think, in Toronto. And these things occur all the time. Now imagine if you were to take this and do it virtually. So I've got my Nike band now, and it tells me how many steps I've done every day. And if I do X steps a day, every day for 30 days, my friends will donate $100 each. And then at the end of the year, we have one big run, and we're all happy. So that turns out to be an interesting one. And this, for health, makes a huge difference. Today, these are proliferating at a very big at an amazing rate. I was with the Dean of Medicine at U of T, who we're doing stuff with, and they are starting a whole big institute on building devices like this. You know? So this is exploding. So I'll be able to measure your heartbeat, your glucose levels, your blood, whatever, and do it very easily, and actually project that to the internet, and then be able to help you. So here's another one, Peak Saver. So this is about saving energy much closer to home here. So we've been able to get very large corporations to do some of this, but I don't know of any super successful program that's been done on the scale we need. Turns out that in Ontario, 40% of the cost of electricity and the infrastructure is in the last 10% of peak. So we build, energy in a crazy way. Imagine we built a hospital, to be with as many doctors, and we stopped with as many doctors as you need on Christmas Eve, when it's really full. Well, you'd have 400 doctors sitting there doing nothing most of the year, and then on Christmas Eve they'd be busy. That's how we build electrical systems. Okay, so we have lots of generators out there in case we're going to get to some level. And then, by the way, we also connect to Ohio, and we don't tell anybody that we're buying coal-fired electricity that blows right over Guelph and creates air pollution problems in a city that's, should be clean. So how do we get people to make these changes here in electricity? Well, this gets into a whole story, which I believe you deal with here at some level, and it's the negawatt story. Today we have a crazy market for electricity. I can plug anything I like into that wall. It's a cold day today, but imagine I plug 6 air conditioners in there and I jack them up. Waterloo Hydro's got to give me electricity, otherwise I can whine and moan, and so they just do it. It's a one-sided market. What if they paid me not to do it, i.e. negawatts? But how can I measure this, control this, manage it? That's where you need the evidence-based stuff. So we have one of the good bits of news, and one of the first people who've signed up to Zero Footprint Rewards is a company here in Waterloo. The company's called Hydro. They build devices that allow you to measure real-time energy in your home. And they're owned in part by Waterloo Hydro, and they're trying to proliferate these devices. So it's not very far from the point in time, actually within weeks, or certainly by the beginning of next year, when you'll be able to get rewarded for every kilowatt hour you produce. Now imagine you're connected to a portal, it's on your phone, and we're having a massive heat wave, and there's a real problem with electricity. We're about to lose electricity. And I send you a little SMS that says, we usually give you 1,000 points for each kilowatt hour you take out at peak. It's now 5,000. So think of congestion pricing applied to energy. So what's congestion pricing? I get on the 407, and as it gets more congested, I pay more. If you're in Singapore, there's a big billboard as you go on a highway, it says you are now paying $1.50 a kilometer. And it gets more congested. It says, it's now $3.50 for every kilometer. And at some point, you get off the road. And that really works. But imagine it in reverse. I'm going to give you more and more points as it gets more and more congested, or as it gets more and more valuable. It turns out that there are days in Ontario where we pay 10 cents a kilowatt hour, 12 cents a kilowatt hour for peak, and we're buying it at 50. So that's crazy. Here's another case study. This is one we're working on with the United Nations. They have a big campaign around the world called I'm a City Changer. And the idea behind this is to get people to really talk about the good they're doing in a city. There's a lot of good that happens, but no one hears about it. So in I'm a City Changer, it's essentially a blog, And when you do something good, you blog about it and everybody's happy. So what we're working to do is to take that one big step forward where anyone who does something good that's measurable gets rewarded. And anyone who talks about it gets rewarded and spreads the word gets rewarded. And the commerce of that city is essentially what's paying for those rewards. So you're generating more commerce, which is very much, it's actually fairly easy. And people understand this model. And it comes out of a marketing budget of someone's grocery store. Energy efficiency in large buildings is a huge issue. So if you think of buildings, here's a simple rule of thumb. And don't beat me up if it's not exactly true. But a typical building that you see there is 60% infrastructure in terms of its energy use and 40% behavior, sometimes more like 50-50. That means that we can build the greatest LEED platinum buildings, and if we don't get people to behave in those buildings, if I go into a LEED platinum building, turn all the lights on, turn all the taps on, and walk away, what does that mean? Is it LEED platinum still? Is it still energy efficient? We have LEED gold buildings in Toronto that are very big energy hogs. We have LEED gold buildings in New York that are more of an energy hog than the buildings across the way that were built in the 50s that are LEED nothings. So what we've done well is attack the infrastructure. We know how to build really efficient buildings. You can go to Manitoba Hydro. It's a phenomenal building in the middle of a very difficult climate, and it behaves extremely well. But if you circumvent that building's special features, you can make it behave very poorly. So energy efficiency and behavior are really important. So this is really a large issue. So how do you actually get someone in a building like that, often not measured even at the floor level, to behave properly? Properly could be switch off your computers when you're not using them. A lot of energy gets wasted in those buildings at night when nobody's there. In fact, that's a huge problem. This is a project we did with Oxford where there were no rewards here, but essentially we created a gauge that would sit in front of the elevators of Oxford buildings. And we did a pilot at the Royal Bank Plaza in Toronto, 5 banks of elevators. And this was from the survey that was done afterwards. First of all, people agreed that they'd never seen something like this before. They agreed that it helped them understand energy, and they agreed that it conveyed the message that Oxford really cares. Those were the 3 things that Oxford wanted. It turns out that here's one company, right? 1 million people in Canada every day pass by Oxford elevators. That's quite astounding out of, population of 33. I mean, they're not all Canadians, but definitely. Here's another situation. So now we're moving on to health. So it turns out that we spend a huge amount of money, on heart patients and diabetes patients who simply don't follow procedures when they're let out of hospital. So you go to the Peter Monk Centre at the Toronto General, and you have a massive heart attack. You're there after about a week. They've sort of got you stabilized, send you home, and they say, you need to do these things, otherwise you're going to be back here. They have detailed research that says, 50% of the people who really do follow this don't ever come back. And people who don't come back in much higher proportions. Turns out that avoiding one person with a severe heart attack on a return trip could save $1 million. Just one person. Especially if you go to the United States and you land up in a hospital for a month, you'll see it's pretty close to $1 million. So this is a massive opportunity for behavior change, and it has a massive impact on sustainability of a population. I gave this example of Toronto Community Housing. We went to meet the CEO, And there's another little byproduct that comes out of this, which is really easy. This is actually an area, these buildings are the slums of Toronto. And that a lot of crime happens in these buildings. Turns out that you can show pretty well, and I'm going to get to it if we have time, that engagement and resilience or safety are highly linked. If the people in these buildings were engaged, they would be safer. So we're proposing an engagement program for them to change behavior, energy behavior in these buildings, and to have that energy savings fund good in those buildings. Better social services, better facilities, and so on. And that's the pot of gold I was talking about. There's a little paper we have on our website if you want to see something about it. It's called Turn Your Energy Waste into Social Good. Here's something that came to us just about a week ago. It's a large school board in Toronto that wants to do the following. They want kids to go home and beat up on their parents to save energy and reward them or reward the families. And what we've suggested is a scheme whereby their rewards monetize into good for the school, whatever social good they want to choose. And so this is something that might happen quite soon. So what we're trying to develop is a single currency for good. Wouldn't that be nice if every single thing done in Waterloo that was sustainable and measurable was rewarded with the single currency? So that you have fungibility. I can buy organic or local food at Loblaws or St. Jacob's Market, and I can use it somewhere else in the system. I can use it to buy a device that helps me measure my glucose levels. And that's the goal. It's a pretty ambitious goal. But we think that a currency like that would make a huge difference. And the challenge is we're actually going after businesses here in Waterloo, and we do have one already, which has to deal with energy in your home. The challenge is to actually, for each and every one of you, to go out and do some of this and propagate it. So we have a bank now lined up that would be willing to come in to Waterloo, it actually is in Waterloo already, and fund points for people who save energy. I mean, they're looking for a city. We're about to choose a city with them. We're doing one pilot like this in London with another bank that has 30,000 homes involved. So those 30,000 homes are going to be engaged with software that measures, manages their energy, shows them how they compare to neighbors, and rewards them for good behavior. So therein lies the analytics, and those rewards would be used. Those rewards will be used for other activities. So this is what our site looks like today. It's just one instance of it. And we're dealing with a number of verticals. This is the vertical for your home, your work, your exercise, and your travel. And imagine that currency spanning all of these. So today, for example, we link to a device that sits in your car that tells us exactly how you're driving. And we can tell whether you're driving efficiently or not. We can tell whether you're driving safely or not. And if you agree to this device, you can get evidence-based insurance. So if you go to Desjardins today in Quebec, you can get evidence-based insurance if you use one of these devices. Turns out that we've had this data for many, many years. Since 1995, our cars have been collecting this data. But we haven't done much with it. But now you can get this data, it talks to the internet, and we pick it up. And by the way, you get different rewards for this as well. So this is just a bit of view of what it looks like. You know, the software manages various programs. This is an example of what the homeowners in London will see if they wanted to look at the electricity, gas, and water bill on a given. So this is one glance. We won a prize for this application. The White House had a competition for the best app for energy, and this was our entry, and it won. And the idea is simply, you know, in one glance, in 15 seconds, I can see exactly what I spent, whether it's up or down from last period, whether I'm actually doing well compared to my peers, and whether I could save money and how much. This is the gauge that we actually used in Oxford. And there's some very interesting math problems behind this. So let me throw out one to you now. What is normal use of energy in a building? How would you even go about that? If I wanted to say, okay, we're going to put a baseline here in this building, and it's the normal use of energy in this building, and that anything below that normal gets rewarded, and anything above the normal, you know, we don't like. How would you do that? That's not a trivial problem, okay? Just trust me. We have an algorithm for doing that, but I'm not totally satisfied with it. Think of all the complexities, you know. The weather's changing, so there's degree days you have to deal with. Well, that's easy. Think of the different usage. I mean, you might have more people in some days than others, or even in the same day at different times of the year. Is a Monday different than a Tuesday, and so on. It's not trivial to come up with something that's actually reasonable, that answers this most simple question: what is normal? What's normal in my home? Because if I don't know what's normal in my home, I don't know how to reward what's not normal, or better. I'll leave that with you. You know, making visible exactly where you're spending what, that's pretty easy, and how it compares. This is our virtual run app. So this sort of shows you, for example, I guess in this thing it's gotten a little messed up, but it shows you a target, what you've done to date, and how many days you have left. It also shows you what your group is doing and where you are relative to people in that group. So we're using group pressure here, as well as, you know, peer pressure, as well as rewards. One of the things that's interesting is if this was showing number of minutes walked or number of kilowatt hours used, whatever, all of these objects, these software objects can be reused. And when you cut across homework, you start to see that there's so many similarities, you know, that it starts to get interesting from a design point of view. So I'm going to stop at this point, and I've got a whole other piece. It's a talk that I did at TEDx 2 weeks ago in New York, and it's about how engagement and resilience are related. But let's leave it and take some questions now. Yeah?
I'm just curious, you're talking about points within this system. Are the points linked to currency, financial value, or are they just simply points?
No, they have real value, and actually there's a market for those points. I mean, you might want to ask, how do I compare volunteering in a children's home to saving energy? I mean, how can I choose what number of points to give if they're fungible? Well, my answer to that is the market will choose. How much are people prepared to pay for you volunteering in a home? How much is the society prepared to pay for you avoiding energy? And, you know, as we change our ideas on that, the points value will change. But yeah, it's a real currency that has real value, that buys real things.
Just as a follow-up, do you see any issues with that as we're seeing this sort of financialization of nature and, you know, biodiversity derivatives, things going on in the financial market that some people find?
I actually look, you can take any program and turn it to bad. You can find bad things in it. But I think weather derivatives and those derivatives can be used extremely efficiently. So, for example, one of the most efficient uses of weather derivatives has to do with droughts. We know when a drought's going to happen. We know when there's going to be a bad crop, because we know when a drought's happening or going to happen or likely to happen. And so why do we wait for the crop to fail for people to start starving before we give them aid? So aid groups buying derivatives on crop failure and markets willing to take that risk is a really good thing. We can generate money ahead of where the problem arises. Now, of course, you can get people who steal derivatives, who crook, like anything. You can get people who take credit cards and get bonus points for doing nothing. But the reality is, I try to look at the positive side. If you put in the right controls, there'll always be a bit of that, but it won't be the dominant thing. Yeah?
I just had a question about the incentive structure that underlies some of these things. Now, some people have incentives to save. Obviously, building owners want to save on dollar cost for energy, so they have an incentive for their employees to do the right thing and use less energy. But if I'm a local distribution company, the more my customers save, the less money is coming into me, right? So as what we do on hydro, I have every incentive to make my customers use as much electricity as possible, because the generators were actually building the capacity are decoupled from the distributors. We're getting the money from the customers. So there's this whole decoupling going on. And so I'm just wondering how you set the incentives in the right place. Hospitals would be out of business, so to speak, in the United States anyway, if everybody are healthy. The incentive is not to have everybody healthy. Right? We had this perverse incentive problem in many situations.
Yeah, but that's where policy comes in, right? So there are these perverse incentives. So, for example, in buildings where tenants don't pay their energy, there's not much incentive for them to save. So you need to create that. I mean, one of our projects is in Newark, New Jersey, in a building for old, elderly, very poor people, and there is no measurement. So in this project, we've placed measurement everywhere. And there is incentive for people to save, okay? So you can change the story. But the reality is, if we just live with the world that we have today, there's all sorts of perverse, subsidies and cross-subsidies and behavior that's created. The way we reward hospitals today in Ontario, the way we pay hospitals for their infrastructure, leads to a perverse incentive. But that can be changed with one little change in policy. You can get paid for keeping people out of hospitals. If you go to Women's College Hospital, which is now being rebuilt in Toronto, and you walk into the elevator today, their big claim to fame is we're a hospital that keeps people out of hospitals. I sat on the board of Mount Sinai Hospital for quite a while, and they really have an incentive to keep people away, because in certain areas they're completely, they just don't know what to do. They can't give good care because it's too overloaded. So yeah, I mean, I think this doesn't happen on its own. In many cases, you need policy changes to make this really, really successful. Yeah.
So you talked about rewards as a tool for customer engagement, but in many contexts, people are also talking about gamification. So it's not just the reward; it's the process.
Yeah.
Like the process of getting their fun, right? That
Yeah.
people might participate. So I was wondering what your opinion is on that in the context of, for example, energy or healthy lifestyles.
I think it's huge. I mean, we actually spend a lot of time thinking about gamification. So I didn't talk about actually the engagement process, what we actually do there, but we do gamify things. And I think, we don't want to live in a dour world where, everything's such a burden and, we've got to save energy, we've got to do this, and it's a drag. We want to make it fun. I'm a firm believer. It's got to be, like bringing the kids home and them learning about energy and producing energy and seeing how much they save, you know, it's a bit of Minecraft for real, you know. You can make it fun. I think we have to, yeah.
We have a question here.
Yeah.
Well, I enjoyed that, very interesting. And a couple of questions came to mind. I think the first one, the same answer you had here. I was going to talk about diffuse benefits, and it may be that peak power reduction is wanted by both the healthcare system and the system operator, for example. But hearing your answer to Keshav, I'm thinking you might say it's a role of policy to try and figure out how those incentive systems can be aligned properly.
Yeah, I mean, I think we know we're spending too much on health, and we have to change that. I mean, it's an absolute imperative now, and the government's struggling with that. The energy, we spent 2 years lobbying the Ministry of Energy, and quite successfully, because now they've come around and said conservation's the thing, but they don't have a way of going about it. So they're looking for both policy changes and, so one of the policy changes we got was really quite dramatic, which is this opening up the data on energy. So we made that happen. But, you know, I think government, from my perspective, having tried to work with them, and needs to be led. And when people start doing stuff like this, when a city like Waterloo wires its homes with real time and actually creates incentives internally, because Waterloo owns its hydro, and the commerce of Waterloo plays ball, and you've got an ecology happening, people start to see what could be. So yeah, I think we got to get there by helping people see.
Can I ask one quick other one? If I heard you correctly, the points could have a market,
Yeah.
and fungibility and so on. So is it better to represent points rather than dollar values?
Yes.
Your home screen, and any reactions? to
Yeah,
that?
very, very definitely so. Because I can spend dollars on any junk I like, and it could destroy the world, kind of thing. You know, I could buy plastic bags and just throw them in the ocean, you know, for example. With our rewards, you cannot do that. So if you got a reward, for example, which was a flight, people like flights, they like going on holiday, well, you make that carbon neutral. So if you got a reward that for your school, it wouldn't be for buying candy for the kids, okay? It would be for buying things that make that school more sustainable. If you got a reward for your Toronto community housing, it wouldn't be, once again, buying, you know, Halloween masks for everybody in the building. It would be for making that building more sustainable.
And similarly, you could cash in the reward for a pizza party. Or
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah, thank you.
It's a bit of a challenge, but not terrible. You know, certainly, you know, the flying thing is somewhat controversial. But, you know, if you make a reward scheme one where all you can do is buy, you know, Birkenstock sandals, you know, I'm being facetious, but you will not get a lot of people to play. So I do believe in offsetting done properly. And, you know, people like to go away on holiday or fly. Yeah.
Thanks for your talk. I think the main challenge is your baseline computation. It's very easy to measure if I walked 30 minutes today because it's absolute value. To measure if I have consumed less than yesterday is a much difficult problem. So are you convinced that you have solved this problem?
You know what? It's like saying there's some mathematical theorems I could give you that if you ask me if I'm convinced, the answer is no. But the answer is I think we've got a reasonable solution. Reasonable enough for a company to pay money to do this and for people in that building to like it and not question it. So yeah, is there a perfect answer? The answer is no. There isn't a single answer to that question. So you have to come up with something that's reasonable. Defining what it means to be normal in this building. You have to take a stand, just like defining what it means to be normal in terms of behavior. No one here is throwing cups at the wall full of water while I'm talking, because that wouldn't be normal behavior. So you can get there. And the thing I've learned with Zero Footprint and pretty much anything I've done, just go in and do it. And the worst that's going to happen is you make a mistake. And you can do it, and you discover that mistake. And okay. So we didn't measure this properly. We can do it better. Let's do it better next time. But if you don't do it, you'll never get going. And that's part of the challenge to all of you. Yep.
I'm interested in the award-winning chart that showed all your utilities together in one screen. And
Yeah.
I wondered if that's being implemented anywhere.
It will be in the pilot we're doing in London. We are going to do that. We wanted to do this in Waterloo. And I had hoped in this visit that I would meet with the utilities. It didn't happen. I talked to a couple of people about trying to arrange that, but it didn't happen. We do have connections into Waterloo Hydro, but it's a matter of getting the other data, the water and gas. Water and gas. So the water, your gas is Union Gas, is that right? Yeah, so we've talked to Union Gas, and Union Gas is the same gas company that services London. So the answer is this could happen if you want it to happen. We'll work with you.
Okay, is there any more questions? One more question.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ron.
No, you can keep it. No, I mean, we got a lot of.
To a very big point.
We actually got a lot of time for questions, so you can keep on going.
Well, I'm curious, I'm thinking about, and especially with the slide here with engagement, because I think a lot about political engagement versus individual responsibility, and I think both are really important.
Mhm.
I'm curious for your thoughts on the extent to which the individual part can make a difference, because as you know, there's a lot of critique about decoupling and that it's good but not good enough, given the scale of the problem. And so a lot of what you've described here is more on the individual side, and is that tinkering at the margins, all the shifts?
I actually don't think so. I don't think our solutions to climate change will come from government. I sort of am very skeptical that a government will wake up one day and do all the right things. There's too many vested interests. The democracy that we run doesn't work well for solving climate change. In other words, just thinking of game theory, getting all of these countries to collaborate on this big problem in the same way, good luck. It ain't going to happen. I think it'll happen from grassroots. I think grassroots, I mean that as well with cities. Cities, at the city level, you can get a city like New York doing a lot of good, and a city like San Francisco doing a lot of good, and a city like Toronto doing good despite its government, and so on. So I think that it's going to be grassroots. It's not going to happen at the country level. It'll happen at the city and individual level. I'm a firm believer that we're going to have to get individual engagement. So it's a pretty strong statement, but it comes with a bit of experience. Yeah?
I really agree with you that it has to be engagement on the part of people. But I'm disheartened by, one, the policy structure that exists today. Let's set that aside. But even that level of individual engagement, we've seen time after time, people get, the first day they want to see their energy use, the second day, the third day, the fifth day they get fed up. After the 1 month, they couldn't care less. And how do you maintain the persistent engagement is not clear.
Okay, so how you make it persistent, in my opinion, at least where we're going, is you attack more of that person than just their energy. So that was the first principle, that if you just tell me about my house, well, I might care about my house, but you might care more about your health, and you might care more about your work, and so on. So I think we need to take a more holistic approach and not just go down one silo. And the second is, I think getting people engaged around energy is hard, and it hasn't worked because we haven't had reward structures that are appropriate for one thing. Now, maybe reward structures won't work for getting people to reduce their energy. I very much doubt it, because they work everywhere else. Look, think of the perverse things people do to get a few more miles. I'm almost a super elite, so I'm going to fly 6 times to Ottawa just to get my super elite. If you think I'm kidding, it happens. I can take you to data in Air Canada, which shows how right towards the end of that period where you get to become super elite or whatever, people do the most crazy things. People fly to Edmonton via San Francisco to get more points. I have a distant relative who just flew to Manchester via San Francisco, Philadelphia, Amsterdam, and then Manchester to get more points. Now that was a 30-something hour trip. You know, so we do crazy things for rewards. We are not rational. So I think if you get that, there's a lot of research that really shows how we behave. You know, one of the rewards we're using, let me give you an example of how we use behavioral economics 101. So here's what we're planning to do with either walking or diabetes or rehab. If you've done something like walk 30 minutes every day for a full month, we're going to make you now eligible for, in a sense, a lottery to win a very large number of points that has very material value, 1 million points, let's say. People do a lot for that. So I do think you can make things persistent, but things won't be persistent unless the rewards are integral. Because at some point, you know, you tell me to save energy because it's important for Ontario, and then I go and see you doing something, you know, that's totally wasteful, i.e. the government. Why should I do it? I can afford the extra 27,000 kilowatt hours. Not material to me. You know, take Canada. A latte costs $3 something at Starbucks. Do you know what the average cost for an energy in a home is in Canada, just average, on a given day? $3. So if I tell you you're going to save 25 cents on that energy, do you think that's material? You know, and you're going to spend $3 on a latte every day. So energy is too cheap here for it to be, you know, so you need something else. I believe unless rewards are integral, we ain't going to see anything persistent. Yeah.
Just a follow-up question too. You mentioned the 50% of a building's energy is ascribed to its infrastructure, and potentially 50% ascribed to behavioral change. That you could affect that. Have you, through your evidence-based measurement, have you demonstrated any impact? Can we see what this reward is?
Yeah, we haven't. You know, in the project we did with Oxford, it was really just peer comparison stuff that went on. So we didn't have rewards. But what we did see was measurable change. So if you just show people what they do and how they compare, you do see some effect. So one of the big effects we could actually statistically prove that was, we had this one game where people were to switch off their computers during lunchtime. And you could see a visible dip, statistically significant dip around lunchtime that then went back up. And we ascribed that to the computers.
We have one final question over here.
Yeah, I wonder whether you need fixed threshold. You know, if you talk about the computer model, the computer rewards, what do you do with those that close them down anyway? Or the incentive of flying, it could come out exactly the same, that people fly and they fly more, I don't know, more energy friendly and they get points for that. Or it's the same was with cars. You have an SUV and you drive it slower and then you get a reward. But if you drive a smaller car, then you don't get a
You know, I'm a firm believer, and this is how I ran businesses as well. If I can go from here to there, and there's an epsilon improvement, speaking mathematically, I'll do it. So that if I get people who drive SUVs to drive slower and save energy, they actually save a lot more in SUVs per per unit speed, if you want. I would rather do that than not do it at all. I remember having a lot of arguments with David Suzuki about offsetting and whether it made sense at all to do it. And, it's not an answer or a panacea, but it can get you a little further along the way. And so I believe in, if you take me from here to there and the world's a little better in state B, I would rather be in state B than state A and trying to solve a bigger problem. And I think that's how you build businesses, and that's how you build, because we're living, essentially what global climate change is about is uncertainty. And in an uncertain world, there is no optimal solution. The ideal mathematical strategy in an uncertain world is to hedge. And if each hedge takes you a little further, I believe we should do it.
Depends if it does, because if you talk to companies, they are all getting more efficient. And you can discuss whether.
Yeah, but people are not. People are not, and we have real benchmarks. If you go to Sweden, if we were sitting in a classroom in Sweden, same people, same demographic, same heat, same, luxury, whatever, the footprint of that group would be about 1/3 of our footprint. Half to a third. So how do they do it? They're not suffering because of it. They're just doing better things. They've got, better infrastructure and better behavior. Swedes don't leave lights on in their rooms. They don't brush their teeth with the water running. We do. So, we've got to change that behavior. I think we are. I believe that if you can change smoking, you can change anything. Because smoking's addictive. Wasting energy is not addictive. So I think if we can change smoking, we can change energy. But there was ownership taken by people who didn't smoke. Kind of an interesting story. Seatbelts is another example, where you mix policy and behavior. When I was a kid, so when seatbelts were initially mandated, the pickup was something like 15%. Even by law, you had to wear them, and there was very low pickup. And it was only when they got kids to beat up on their parents that seatbelts really happened. And now they're just automatic. And I remember people in France laughing at me when I put on a seatbelt. Oh, you got to be kidding! You're putting on a seatbelt? Why would you do that? And you can still go to countries where people don't. But now, in France, they put on seatbelts. And they don't smoke. At least not in cafes. It's socially unacceptable now. Just done. Imagine if it was socially unacceptable to waste energy. You wouldn't be wasting as much energy, So I believe we'll get there. I do believe. I believe.
Both are examples for government regulation.
Well, I think we've got a government made of people who don't understand this, honestly speaking, who have a background of knowing how to build things, but not how to avoid building things. So until we change that government, and we have different people in government who can actually think about these things from a broader perspective, we won't change. But I'll give you other people in government, like Mayor Bloomberg, who's no green guy, gets it. He knows that. He's actually getting people in New York to walk up one flight in a big high-rise instead of taking the elevator, hitting the elevator button. Turns out you use a huge amount of energy. This was one of the games that we did at Oxford. If you're on the 29th floor and you want to go to the 30th floor and you hit the elevator button, it comes all the way up, takes you up one floor, then you do the same thing, it comes all the way up to get you to go down one floor. That's very expensive in energy. So, and now it gets to policy and design. Guess what? Our buildings are not designed to make that easy. Go to a high-rise in Toronto, TD Centre, and try and find the staircase. It's pretty hard. So we don't make it easy. So I'm actually dealing with, so I deal a lot with the Ontario, the architecture group at the University of Toronto, the dean, and we were actually debating this issue. And you have to design buildings and make it mandatory for staircases to be easily accessible, and then people will use them. So I've seen amazing things. I was just at this TED conference in New York. The commissioner for traffic in New York City is amazing how she's changed behavior with paint. So guess what? Cycling in New York City used to be a suicide. You know, if you wanted to commit suicide, you got on a bike and you drove down 2nd Avenue. It's not a joke, but I wrote you can look this article up in the Huffington Post. I wrote about cycling in Toronto recently. But in Toronto today, it's much, much more dangerous to ride a bike than it is in New York City. How did they change it? In part, just with paint. They painted the cycle lanes green. They put cycle lanes where cycle lanes should be, not in between cars and, you know. So right outside my office, a young woman was killed just because we don't have proper cycle lanes. And pure case, a truck just wiped her out. So, you know, you can change behavior and it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. That's the thing about behavior change. If you hit it right, it's really cheap compared to anything else. Okay.
Thank you very much, Dr.